Building the gas sensor board today. I'm just going to show a quick layout of what everything came apart of it. So we saw the placement of all the perf boards, and what's going on here is that I'm trying to keep the board in the center straight, really, by using whatever I had on me, which was these perf boards. So I started taping them down and everything to keep everything held in place. After that was held in place, I was happy with it. I got out the stencil and I started to just measure it and place it on top of each other to get all the holes lined up correctly and whatnot. I had a mix of through-hole and SMD components, so the through-hole components had no need to make a hole in the stencil, essentially, just SMD parts. I taped around the edges here thinking that I might need to cover it up or to hold it more rigidly, but I think for future projects I don't think I would need to, and I might make myself a stencil jig of some sort. So I started got my solder paste, and laid it on flat here. And what you can do with this is get any old credit card or some sort of card, and if you don't have a squeegee, and I used an old card for this. And you just want to push it again to one fell swoop. Sponsored by Yume World. So I've done this multiple times going over each pass to ensure the paste had actually sunk through. And really you want to make sure, you really want to make sure you've done this multiple times, because later, I don't think it shows in this video, that it didn't go through for a really small component, so I had to manually put some paste on. And also there is a tape on the bottom of the stencil, and I didn't know that at first, so I had to redo it again and take off the tape this time. So that was a nice surprise. So after doing that, I did it again, and as you could see, the paste had gone on just fine. Just removed all the tape off the boards here, and so I can reuse them. Gone over to the hot plate now and placed all the components, started placing all the components on it. I do apologize, you might see my head bopping in there, because this was not a good idea without a microscope. And 0402 parts are a pain to place. They are an absolute pain. So I'm just going over this in the background, and I had my iPad up there just to reference to the bomb, I think, or the schematic for whatever I needed to place down. I actually wrote all the designators on the packets beforehand, so it was quite easy to reference to, but as I said before, I didn't have a microscope on me, so some of the designators were actually quite small for me to see, so I had to just keep referring and like really zoom in with my microscopic eyes to see. You can see me holding using my two hands as almost like a cantilever, almost making sure I place it directly on the pad itself. The whole process took about 3 hours, I think. Something I've never done before, but it was very interesting, and it was very, very difficult, I think, at some parts. You can see my head bopping in there. It was difficult at some parts because of the small components, and there was like this really small diode which I could not see the polarity marking on, and I've just winked it anyway and just thought, yeah, well, if it flows it doesn't flow, if it flows it flows. So come to placing, like making a new build or something, we'll stick with those 603s just for ease, unless I get assembled outside, but find out later in this video what I decide to do. So I think this is the power part, and an up close of me just looking in. When you come to placing this part, I read somewhere, and I think it was quite helpful actually that I actually found this, that you should place the smallest parts first, I believe, and work your way up. This is so that you don't get into difficulties when placing these components around. For example, if you had like two big inductors and you had to place a small tiny, I don't know, resistor capacitor in between, it would be quite difficult to place them. So place the small ones first, then the larger components. So you can see from here, I ran out of space actually on my phone, and I didn't have any more. I couldn't really do much else. So this is actually the final completed board right in front of me. I took a picture of it. And boy, it looks good. I feel honestly quite proud of myself for placing all these parts. But I couldn't get to reflow it. I couldn't do it. So apparently the plate I bought was a preheating plate instead of opposed to a hot plate. It did say as a hot plate, but you can't really trust myself on these types of things. So what happened really, that it said it got up to 200 degrees and the soil price was supposed to be 180, but I would imagine that the PCB itself has a thermal mass, thermal body, it needs to heat up for reaching, and it just wasn't able to reflow. So instead, like, the paste came and then the heat got applied and just kind of spread all over from what you saw in the image. I didn't really have any other way to melt it. I don't have like a heating soldering station or whatever like that for a heat gun. So I was quite disappointed and ashamed of that. I couldn't really bring the project to life, unfortunately. I tried to get it assembled on JLC, and there's a lot of parts that are not provided, so I'm going to look for another alternative assembler, I think, and get the project built. But before that, there was a bit of errors on the PCB anyway, like the voltage output of the gas sensor, I believe, is 0 to 5. So I'll need to set that down to 3v3. But overall, the project was very enjoyable to do. I don't think it was a waste of money, as it was an experience and something that I'm happy I ended up doing and highly recommend to anyone doing it. But yeah, it's just a shame I couldn't get the board to reflow. But it is what it is, and have to move on for next time. So I hope you enjoyed that. It was a bit of a different one today, and I'll see you in the next one.